Robert Redford was one of the greatest names in modern Hollywood. The 89-year-old actor died early this morning.
The wind moved softly across the mountains that morning, whispering through the pines as if nature itself knew it was saying goodbye. On September 16th, 2025, Hollywood's golden light dimmed when Robert Redford, actor, director, visionary, and eternal storyteller, took his final breath at age 89. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in the sanctuary he built with his own hands, his beloved Sundance home in Utah. Surrounded by his family, embraced by the land he had protected for half a century, Robert Redford's life came to a close exactly where it had always truly belonged, in nature. There were no flashing cameras that day, no grand procession of Hollywood stars, just the crisp mountain air, the smell of cedar, and the quiet presence of those who loved him most. The family released a simple statement: "He will be missed greatly." The family requests privacy. It was brief, almost modest. But those who understood Robert Redford knew simplicity was his way of saying everything. They held a private ceremony under the aspen trees, not far from where he had once filmed the early sketches of Jeremiah Johnson.
The eagle or the sparrow showed the path he was to follow.
A handful of family members gathered, his wife Sybil, his daughters Shauna and Amy, and his grandchildren, each carrying a memory brighter than any golden statue. They placed his old straw hat beside a single candle and watched its flame dance against the soft mountain light. It was a farewell without spectacle, quiet, sincere, human, the kind of ending Redford himself might have written. For decades, the world had known him as the Sundance Kid, the Great Gatsby, the all-American heartthrob who turned storytelling into art. But behind those famous blue eyes lived a man who had long sought peace over praise. He once said, "I've always been drawn to the margins, the places where the noise fades and something real begins." And in the end, that's where he chose to rest, on the margins of the world, away from the noise. As news of his passing spread, tributes poured in from every corner of the globe.
We did just learn that legendary actor and director Robert Redford has passed away.
Fellow actors, directors, and fans posting messages of admiration, gratitude, and disbelief. Yet amid all the public mourning, something extraordinary happened in private. For the first time in decades, the Redford family began to speak openly about the man behind the myth. The stories they told were not of premieres or fame, but of quiet mornings, handwritten letters, and the laughter of a grandfather who loved his family more than his legacy. His daughter Amy once said that her father taught us to listen to silence. That simple phrase became the thread of the family's remembrance. At the funeral, as they shared stories beside the fire, it wasn't his awards they mentioned. It was the way he whistled while feeding the horses, how he insisted on taking long walks before breakfast, and how he believed that a day spent outside was a day saved. Robert Redford had always been defined by dualities: the movie star and the mountain man, the public icon and the private soul. But to his children and grandchildren, those two worlds were never separate. He brought Hollywood to the mountains and the mountains into Hollywood. To them, he was Grandpa Bob, the man who made up bedtime stories about rivers and coyotes, who taught them to ride horses and to see art in everything, even in the bark of a tree. After the funeral, his grandson Connor shared a memory online, a faded photograph of himself as a child, perched on Redford's shoulders, both wearing matching cowboy hats. "He was larger than life to the world," Connor wrote, "but to us, he was simply that family." The post went viral, not because it was glamorous, but because it was real. People saw, maybe for the first time, the man Robert Redford had worked so hard to protect from public view. The father, the grandfather, the teacher. Even those who never met him could sense that there was something sacred in the way his family spoke, a gentleness that mirrored the landscapes he loved. "Isn't it fitting," one mourner wrote, "that the Sundance Kid spent his last moments in Sundance?" The thought resonated deeply. After a lifetime of shaping American cinema, Redford's final act was not a film, but a return. To stillness, to simplicity, to home. In the days that followed, his children shared a few carefully chosen words with close friends and press. They spoke of his humor, his stubbornness, his endless curiosity. Amy described him as a man of quiet conviction, someone who taught us that beauty doesn't have to shout. Shauna added, he was the glue, not because he demanded attention, but because he gave it. Every word revealed another side of him. Not the legend carved into Hollywood history, but the man who found joy in the smallest things. A fresh snowfall, the rustle of trees, a hand resting on his grandchild's shoulder. In the end, his life wasn't defined by what he created on film, but by what he preserved off-screen. Family, wilderness, and integrity. The unseen legacy his family spoke of wasn't hidden in vaults or museums. It lived in the laughter echoing through the canyons of Sundance, and in the next generation now carrying his name forward. That's where this story truly begins. Not with his fame, but with his family, finally breaking their silence to share what Robert Redford left behind. A legacy of love, humility, and an unshakable belief in the power of quiet purpose. When someone you admire passes away, what's the one memory or lesson you hope people will remember about you? To the world, Robert Redford was the embodiment of Hollywood elegance, a man of cool confidence, effortless charisma, and quiet rebellion. But to his family, he was something else entirely. They didn't see the Sundance Kid or the Great Gatsby. They saw a man who burned the pancakes, who whistled out of tune, who refused to let anyone else mow the lawn because you have to feel the ground under your feet. The Robert Redford they knew was not an untouchable legend. He was human, humble, and deeply devoted. His daughter Amy once said, "Dad's favorite role was just being a dad." It was true. Though his life was filled with premieres and camera flashes, his proudest moments happened far from the spotlight. Teaching his kids how to fish, hiking through the forest behind their Sundance cabin, or sitting by the fire telling stories about mountain lions and movie sets that blurred together. But beneath that warmth, there was pain, the kind of grief that never leaves but learns to live quietly beside you. In 1959, Robert and his first wife, Lola Van Wagenen, lost their firstborn son, Scott, to sudden infant death syndrome. He was just 10 weeks old. Redford rarely spoke of it, even decades later, but in one rare interview, he admitted, "Something like that doesn't get completely dismissed. It probably shows up in various small ways you're not even aware of." Those small ways shaped him. They softened his edges. They made him hold his children a little tighter. He went on to raise 4 children with Lola: Scott, Shauna, Jamie, and Amy, each one inheriting a different piece of him. Shauna, the artist's eye; Jamie, the activist's heart; Amy, the storyteller's soul. And yet, even as his family grew, tragedy returned. In 2020, his son Jamie, a filmmaker and environmental activist, died after a long battle with liver cancer. Losing Jamie shattered him. "There have been so many hits on our family that no one knows about," he once said quietly. "The hardest thing in the world is when your children have problems." After Jamie's passing, friends said Redford spent long hours walking alone at Sundance, sometimes stopping to sit by the lake with a sketchbook on his lap. One entry he wrote simply read, "I planted a tree for him." It faces the morning sun. That's how he lived, facing the light. That tree still stands today. Those closest to him say that Redford's resilience came from his ability to turn heartbreak into purpose. He poured his grief into his art, and his art into his love for his family. He once said, "Acting was never therapy, but it taught me to listen." And in his later years, that's exactly what he did. He listened. To his children, his grandchildren, and the quiet hum of life continuing around him. His daughter Shauna recalled how, during family dinners, he always sat at the same spot by the window, where he could see the sunset over the mountains. "He'd tell stories, but never about himself," she said. "He'd rather ask about your dreams, your fears." He wanted to know who you were becoming to his grandchildren. He was more mentor than celebrity. They called him Grandpa Bob. Never Robert, never Redford. And he loved it that way. After his death, his grandchildren began sharing fragments of their memories, each one revealing a different piece of the man. His grandson Connor posted a photograph of them golfing together, writing, "He was larger than life to the world, but to his family, he was simply that, family." His granddaughter Lena posted a picture of herself as a child, wearing a small Kangol cap that matched his. "Taught me so much," she wrote. "Had us all in Kangol." Beneath that lighthearted caption was something deeper, proof of how much joy he found in the simplest connections. There was also a photo of Redford riding horseback beside his late son, Jamie. Lena captioned it, "Dad and Grandpa. I feel like they're riding awesome horses in heaven." That image struck a chord with millions. It was more than nostalgia. It was the story of two generations bound by the same quiet spirit. Father and son, side by side again, beneath an endless sky. Those who knew Redford say his gentleness grew stronger with age. He became more reflective, more at peace with the dualities of his life. His fame no longer defined him. His family did. Once, during an interview, when asked what his greatest achievement was, he smiled and said, "The children. They're the best thing in my life." The answer was immediate, unfiltered, like a rare moment of public vulnerability from a man who usually guarded his emotions. To his family, that sentence was everything. It summed up who he was. An artist who believed that life's real work wasn't in the films he made, but in the people he raised. Even the way he aged reflected his philosophy, naturally gracefully without artifice. He stayed true to the mountain man within him. His daughter Amy once joked, "Dad's idea of luxury was coffee on the porch at sunrise." He didn't chase youth or perfection. He cherished authenticity, in art, in people, and in the earth itself. In that authenticity, he taught his family their most important lesson, that humility is not weakness, and gentleness is not fragility. To be kind in a world of noise, that, he believed, was real strength. Have you ever learned something about a loved one, a story, a habit, a secret, that changed the way you saw them forever? In the quiet wake of his funeral, when the condolences began to fade and the mountain air returned to stillness, Robert Redford's family found themselves surrounded not only by memories, but by a legacy too vast to measure. It wasn't just the films he made, it was the world he built. For Robert Redford, Sundance was never about celebrity. It was about creation, freedom, integrity. What began in the 1960s as a small retreat for artists and friends evolved into a movement that changed cinema itself. In 1981, he founded the Sundance Institute, and a few years later, the Sundance Film Festival. Both born from his belief that stories with truth deserved a home. While Hollywood obsessed over profit, Redford fought for purity. For the dreamers who filmed in garages and deserts, for the voices no one else would amplify. He called it the place where authenticity meets risk. And that spirit lived in his family long before the rest of the world understood what it meant. When his daughter, Amy Redford, first walked into her father's festival as a teenager, she remembered him whispering, "Don't look at who's here. Look at what's being said." Decades later, Amy would grow into a filmmaker herself, directing and producing with the same understated courage that defined her father. She described Sundance not as an institution, but as Dad's heartbeat turned into a landscape. His son Jamie, too, followed in his footsteps, though in his own quiet way. Jamie's passion wasn't the camera, but the cause. He co-founded the Redford Center, a nonprofit using film to drive environmental action. When Jamie passed away in 2020, Robert said in a rare public statement, "Jamie lived a beautiful, impactful life, and his legacy lives on through his children and the films and passion he shared." Now, Jamie's son Dylan continues that work, serving on the center's board, ensuring that the Redford name remains tied not just to art, but to advocacy. Even his grandson Connor, who once rode ponies with Grandpa Bob, found his way to Sundance, working at the Institute to help support emerging filmmakers. It's as if Redford had been preparing them all along, teaching by quiet example. He didn't hand his children fame, he handed them purpose. One of his old friends once said, "Robert didn't raise heirs, he raised torchbearers." And it's true. He spent his later years making sure that the things he built would not crumble when he was gone. In 2018, when asked about the future of Sundance, he said calmly, "I've been bringing my children, Shauna, Amy, and Jamie, into the picture. They're there now, and they're ready to run the show." Even then, he was letting go with grace, passing the baton before the race ended. But Sundance was just one part of a much greater story, his love for the Earth itself. Long before environmentalism became fashionable, Redford was already protecting land, rivers, and wildlife. He preserved over 5,000 acres of wilderness around his Utah property, ensuring that no developer could ever touch it. He worked with groups like the Natural Resources Defense Council, fought against drilling in sacred lands, and spoke openly about climate change when few others dared. Yet, he never did it for applause. "I don't want to be remembered for speeches," he said. "I want to be remembered for what's left standing." His family understood that. To them, his environmental work wasn't activism, it was an act of love. Amy once recalled how, as children, they weren't allowed to throw rocks into streams just for fun. He'd tell them, every ripple has a reason. It was his gentle way of teaching respect for water, for land, for life itself. That same philosophy now guides his grandchildren, who speak of nature as if it were another family member. Lena, his granddaughter, posted after his passing, "Grandpa taught me that home isn't a house. It's the place you protect." That simple line carried the weight of his entire legacy. Actors and directors who had worked with him knew this side too. Ethan Hawke said in a tribute, "Robert's impact isn't just on screen. It's in every filmmaker who believed their small story mattered. He built a bridge for us. That bridge remains through Sundance, through the Redford Center, through every voice that still echoes in the canyon he called home. The Redford family now protects that bridge like a sacred inheritance." Each project, each festival, each environmental effort continues to honor his belief that storytelling could change the world, not through spectacle, but through sincerity. Even in his absence, Sundance still breathes with his vision. Every January, when the mountain town fills with filmmakers and dreamers, they gather beneath banners that read Sundance Institute. And though his chair sits empty at the front row, his presence lingers. In the snow, in the air, in every film that dares to tell the truth. He didn't want worship, Amy once said. He wanted continuity. And he achieved it. Through his family, his foundation, and the millions he inspired, Robert Redford's legacy refuses to fade. It grows quietly, like the pine trees that surround his home, reaching higher each year, but rooted in the same soil he loved. Perhaps that's the most beautiful thing about his story. The man who once shunned fame ended up creating a legacy so powerful that it transcended him. A legacy that now belongs to his children, his grandchildren, and every storyteller who ever dared to be honest. If you could leave one legacy behind, not fame, not fortune, but something that lasts, what would it be? As the world absorbed the news of Robert Redford's passing, tributes poured in like sunlight breaking through a storm. From every corner of Hollywood came voices filled with reverence, not just for his craft, but for his character. It was as though the industry had suddenly remembered the quiet architect who had shaped its soul. Barbra Streisand, his longtime friend and co-star from The Way We Were, shared a message that captured what so many felt. He was charismatic, intelligent, intense, always interesting. Working with him was pure joy, but it was what she revealed next that moved people most. In their final visit, the two exchanged drawings as gifts, small personal sketches neither would ever sell or show. "He had an artist's heart," she wrote, "and that's the part of him I'll miss most." The public saw the movie star, his friends saw the painter, the thinker, the man who found meaning in stillness. Jane Fonda, who had known Redford for more than half a century, wrote simply, "I can't stop crying." They had shared the screen 4 times, from Barefoot in the Park to Our Souls at Night. She called him a beautiful person in every way, a man who stood for an America we have to keep fighting for. Her words echoed the quiet integrity that defined him. An artist, yes, but also a man of principle. Scarlett Johansson, who got her first major role as a teenager in The Horse Whisperer, thanked him for shaping her career and her confidence. "He had all the time in the world," she wrote. "He made me believe that patience and kindness could exist in this business." For her, Redford wasn't just a director, he was a teacher. And when she spoke at a tribute screening held weeks later, her voice cracked. "He gave me my first shot, but he also gave me a standard, to always care more about truth than attention." Others followed. Demi Moore called him an incredible actor, director, husband, father, and friend. A man who made everyone feel seen. Ethan Hawke described him as the conscience of independent film. And Meryl Streep, who rarely makes public statements, wrote, "He had that rare gift, to make silence feel profound." Each tribute told a story, but together they formed something greater. A portrait of a man whose true success wasn't in what he built, but how he inspired others to build after him. In Utah, far from Hollywood's bright lights, his family watched these tributes unfold quietly. They smiled at the old film clips and interviews, sometimes laughing at how serious he could look on screen. But they also knew that the man in those movies wasn't the whole truth. The real Robert Redford was in the small gestures, in how he'd wake up before dawn to watch the sunrise with his grandchildren, or how he'd pause while painting to help them feed the horses. His granddaughter Lena posted one last tribute online, a black and white photo of him sitting by the lake at Sundance, the mountains behind him blurred by mist. The caption read, "He found his peace here and he gave us ours." It was the final word the family wanted the world to remember: peace. They had lost a father, a grandfather, and a guiding light. But they had also inherited something unbreakable. Not fame, not fortune, but values. His love for truth, for craft, for the earth, those lived on through them. Amy, his daughter, summed it up best during a small family gathering after his funeral. She said softly, "Dad's legacy isn't something we have to carry. It's something we get to continue." In that moment, it was clear that the man who spent a lifetime telling stories had become one himself, eternal, layered, full of grace. Outside, the mountains stood as they always had. Snow dusted the trees. The air smelled like pine and memory. Sundance, the dream he had built from dust, was now his monument, not in marble or bronze, but in the living, breathing artists who walked its trails every year. And somewhere in that open sky, it felt as though his spirit lingered. Part wind, part light, part legacy. In the end, Robert Redford's life reads less like a Hollywood script and more like a poem. One written in landscapes and laughter, in courage and restraint. He showed the world that real greatness doesn't shout. It whispers, it builds, it lasts. To the public, he was an icon. To his peers, a visionary. To his family, a man who loved quietly, worked tirelessly, and believed deeply that art should serve something larger than the self. And that's where his unseen legacy truly lives. Not in awards or headlines, but in the way he made people feel. He made audiences believe in hope again. He made filmmakers believe in honesty. He made his family believe that kindness could outlive time. After the funeral, as his loved ones left the mountains and the evening light settled over Sundance, they looked back one last time at the cabin where he had drawn his final breath. The sun dipped behind the peaks, and the air grew still. For a moment, everything felt suspended. Not like an ending, but a continuation. Because some stories never really end. They just keep echoing. In films, in forests, in families, and in hearts. And perhaps that's how Robert Redford would have wanted it. No fanfare, no final curtain, just the quiet assurance that he had left the world better than he found it.